Okie doke. There we go. So, as per our usual, this is a Microsoft Teams meeting. We are scheduled for 60 minutes. Please keep yourself on mute, keep your camera off. That way we can conserve bandwidth. But if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We've got a fairly small group today. Feel free to raise your hand. We can do some discussion while we're going through things. We'll also have some time, hopefully, for questions and answers at the end. We are recording this meeting. It will be uploaded to our document review playlist on YouTube, so it will be available for viewing later. So if you know of anyone who isn't able to make it today, it will be available for them. So we're going to talk about a few things. Some of these, if you came to our compliance review call last week, some of them will be kind of similar topics, but we're going to talk about them in ways that are specific to document review. Before we get into those specific topics, though, we are going to talk about why we call the suspicious case report what we call it. We've had a number of questions about this, and I want to make sure that everyone is kind of up to date and understands why we use those specific words. We're going to talk about requirements for document dates because we've got some questions that have come in about that. We're going to talk about some upcoming knowledge base articles. Then we're going to move into types of risk and how they affect document review, and then talk about any recent unusual or suspicious documents that you all have seen out in the field. So first, the suspicious case report. I've gotten a lot of questions about why we call it that. When we file a suspicious case report, it doesn't necessarily mean fraud. And in most cases, suspicious case reports actually don't turn out to be cases that are fraud. They turn out to be cases that just make you go, that's unusual. Kind of like our friend the owl here, just kind of looking, going, that's strange. We need some more review on this. I had somebody ask me early last week why we don't call it the suspicious activity report. And on that specific phrase, there's a very, very definite reason. And that's because since we work with agency partners at the local, state, and federal level, we try our best to speak the same language that they do. So that way, if we do an investigation, we are able to share information back and forth as seamlessly as possible. And at the federal level, suspicious activity means any observed behavior that may indicate pre-operational planning associated with terrorism or terrorism-related crime. If we are having some documentation in RC Care that may indicate operational planning associated with terrorism, we need much more than the suspicious case report for that. So we can't call it the suspicious activity report because that's not what suspicious activity means under the law. We don't call it the fraud report because we don't know it's fraud when it comes in. All we know is it's something that makes us go, We don't call it, someone actually suggested that we call it the training issue report. Well, not all of them are training issues. Sometimes members of our workforce do everything right. And sometimes bad actors still act badly and try to perpetrate fraud against the American Red Cross. It's not always a training thing. Another person suggested the suspicious they said RC case and RC respond call report. I think they were trying to say RC care case and RC respond call report. I can't even say that, and I'm reading it. That is, oh my heavens, a lot of words. It would get turned into some kind of weird acronym, as we do in the American Red Cross. And somebody suggested the bad actor report. Well, sometimes the people on the other side of the suspicious case report are not bad actors. Sometimes they're highly vulnerable clients. So these are all real suggestions that we've received. So when we created the suspicious case report, that name was selected in careful consideration and collaboration with our partners in finance and audit and the Office of Ethics and Compliance. But one of the pieces of pushback I've kind of gotten is that it sounds scary. And that's a place where you all can really help out, is to really help socialize that just because a suspicious case report comes in doesn't mean we automatically think somebody's done something bad. It's not what that means at all. And it doesn't have to be scary. And it's okay to socialize that it's okay to submit those early and often. Any questions about that? Now, let's talk about document dates. I'm actually kind of excited about this. So in our doctrine, it says that address confirmation documents have to include the client's name and pre-disaster address and be current or dated within 60 days of the event. So not all document types have to have that 60 days dating to be considered current. And this is going to be small, and I'm sorry because there's a lot of document types, but this now is also in the knowledge base in RC Care. It's very exciting. But we have had a number of clients who have had their home's deeds rejected because it wasn't dated in the last 60 days. Like, I bought my home 21 years ago. It's not going to be dated in the last 60 days if I submit the deed to my house. So we have to kind of broaden what we know of as current. So we do have some things like a mortgage statement or recent rental payments or utility bills or bank statements or other official documents. So all of these have to be dated within 60 days. But for some of these other things, just think about what makes sense for that document to be current. So a deed, there are no date restrictions. Same with the affidavit of ownership interest, no restrictions. It's very similar to a deed in a lot of ways. When we're looking at things involving vehicles, look at the end date. And if it doesn't end more than 60 days before the event, you can take it. You can approve that. Totally okay. Any questions about any of these? I know this is a lot of words, but hopefully it kind of helps and may help alleviate some of the friction in document approval that may be happening. This exact table is now in the knowledge base too. Yes, looks like Melissa, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I know that documents are being moved to the knowledge base now. Is that what it is? So everything that was in the exchange is now in the knowledge base?
Not everything, but things like the job tools, we are retiring like the compliance review, document review, and event review job tools, moving them into the knowledge base. And part of the reason for that is, well, A, the exchange is getting awfully unstable. But also when we have questions like this, we can very easily add this stuff to the knowledge base and don't have to go through the entire doctrine process where we have a job tool that has been in draft form for the last 3 years.
Okay. I hear you on all of that. So the exchange, the system that is hosting the exchange is going to be, we're going to be going to a new system. And so it
Yes.
will not be unstable and there'll be some reorganization and stuff. So we will
Yes.
once again have a functional intranet.
Yes.
I was just thinking in terms of, for people who don't have an RC Care account,
Mhm.
and if they need to review, if I want my boss to review the doctrine to see, should I or shouldn't I, or the job tool for the my ID address role, she can't go into RC Care and take a look at the knowledge base, but she would be able to get it from the whatever the new exchange is. So I'm just wondering if I'm just planting the seed, I guess.
No, I get it. The problem is that with the doctrine process, we simply cannot keep up. And so we're trying very hard to keep as much as possible about the system in the system.
Okay.
However, this table actually came out of the client care standards and procedures, which is on the exchange.
And this is great to see because it just happened to come up in conversation with me and Amanda yesterday. So, cool.
Yeah. And so what the client care standards and procedures say is it has hey, we can use all these document types for address. And they have to be either current or within 60 days of the event. Because that's, kind of what the S&P standards and procedures are, is kind of that big overarching piece. But it lists all of these document types and the requirement that, okay, it's got to be current or within 60 days. What we've done here is get a little bit more granular, because apparently there's some misunderstanding about like what makes a deed current, even though for some folks that's just common knowledge. And so that's why we haven't like really gotten that granular in the standards and procedures, partly because it would then be 85 pages long and then no one would read it. But what this came from though is still on the exchange. It just came from the S&Ps, just with more detail. So hopefully that's helpful. And in the knowledge base, if you have folks like that, they can always get monitoring access to RC Care and then would have access to see things in the knowledge base. So that is also an option if they're in a position where they're needing to do that. Any other questions about this type of stuff? I think most of this is fairly straightforward. I know the tax assessor record is worded a little strangely. As I can find better words, I will put better words in the knowledge base. But, effectively, we're looking at either a tax assessor record from that year, same year as the event, or if it's from the previous year, make sure the year didn't end more than 60 days before the event. Just kind of take that 60 days and just sort of apply it, with common sense. But hopefully this will help and hopefully we'll get you out of some sticky document review situations. So, kind of along that vein, that currently is Knowledge Base Article 1327. It was published this afternoon. So it is in there and it is called What Makes an Address Document Current? One of the things that we are trying very hard to do as we put together these new articles for our review cadre is when I title something, I put document review at the beginning of anything that's for document review, compliance review ahead of anything that's for compliance review, and event review ahead of the title for anything that's for event review. And what happens then is that, when you look at them alphabetically, they all group together, which makes the articles a little bit easier to find. We are working on some upcoming articles, the requirements for rental agreements and lease agreements. Also an article about what documents require signatures. That's a question we've gotten recently. And then similar to the address confirmations, we'll have an ID document detail article as well. That one will be a bit different because the dating on it isn't so critical. The place where ID documents and dating really becomes really important is on these last three, where these last three, the driver's license, state ID, and consular ID, assuming the consular ID has the primary client's name and the address, they don't all have addresses on them. If the document expired more than 3 months before the date of the disaster, it's still an ID document, but then it cannot be used for address. And that wording right there, I actually copied and pasted out of the client care standards and procedures document. So that detail is all in there as well. Now, let's talk about types of risk. So we talked about this some on the compliance review call. For those of you who were on that call, we're going to talk about types of risk because we spent the last couple of months talking about types of fraud. And when we talk about these, we're going to talk about how they relate specifically to documents and to document review. So here are the types of risk: the strategic, reputational, compliance, regulatory or legal, information technology or cybersecurity, then financial risk and operational risk. And the one that really gets the most press in terms of those of us who do review is financial risk. This is the risk that the organization is going to lose funds, that there will be a financial loss. So an example of this type of risk is if a client uploads a fake or forged document and it gets approved, and then the client receives a payment. So that is the risk. And one of the ways we control for that risk is by having a team of document reviewers who are well versed in looking at documents and what to look for, and by having these calls to discuss recent documents that look kind of squirrely and things like that. So this is the risk, but we have controls against that risk. Are there any questions about financial risk? You know, it's one that is kind of one of the more straightforward ones. Strategic risk is interesting when it comes to document review. On the compliance review call, the example of strategic risk that came up was undeliverable emails. So a strategic risk is something that affects the ability of the Red Cross to deliver the mission. And so, you know, in the case of an undeliverable email, you know, then we can't provide the client with an EFT if they want an EFT payment. We can't get a hold of the client to do follow-up. Maybe they had IDC needs, and if all they have is a bad email and we don't have a phone number for them, you know, we can't do good client follow-up. For document review, the strategic risk looks a little bit different. So if responders don't complete my actions, so I know there's been some discussion recently among document reviewers getting documents for cases that have 2 responders on them. And if responders don't complete my actions, so their ID and address is not fully confirmed, assuming they did not pass GIACT for ID and address, then clients have to upload documents to receive any additional funds. So if they need supplemental or they need health services or mental health funds, and if the responders haven't completed my actions, then clients have to upload the documents. Then a document reviewer has to go look at and then make a review determination, whether it's to approve or reject the document. And that can cause a delay in service to the clients, and it puts extra steps on the clients. So hopefully the cases that you're getting for document review really should only be single responder cases. Another potential strategic risk on the client side of things is that if a client is repeatedly uploading a document that is either incomplete or not legible, because one of the requirements for being able to review a document is the document be complete. This is particularly difficult with things like rental agreements and leases, where frequently, clients will send us just the first page. Well, that's not complete. And then that can cause a delay in service to the clients. And, fortunately, we have folks that can connect with the clients and do follow-up with them to try to make sure we get what we need, but it still is a strategic risk. Not all risk is fraud. Any questions about this one? Reputational risk is an interesting one. Reputational risk is often linked to other types of risk. So this is, literally threats to the reputation of the American Red Cross, and that can be either due to the conduct of the organization or employees or volunteers or any other individuals associated with the organization. And I always tell folks, particularly when you're documenting things in a case, so like if you're going in and making a comment in a case, you really need to make sure that two things are true. That you would be comfortable with whatever you're writing in that case as being read in a court of law, and also being read on the 6 o'clock news. It is totally okay to state facts on the case. You can say this document is not legible, this document appears to have been tampered with, or these fonts are different, or this document is very small, I can't see it. Those are all facts. At no point have you said in those, hey, I think this client is a fraud face. Just state the facts. Or even, hey, I'd like somebody else to review this case with me. Can I please have some assistance? Totally fine. Those types of comments completely pass both of those questions. That would be totally fine to be, on the news, in the newspaper, and in a court of law. No problem. But that's something to think about while we are documenting things in clients' cases, because sometimes case records get subpoenaed into courts of law. Any questions about this? One of the places where we see reputational risk that's relevant to the document review cadre, it goes back to a client uploading a fake or forged document, then being issued a payment. And that payment, if that client is trying to commit fraud, then that results in misuse of donor dollars. And that presents potential reputational risk, because that's not a great headline. And so that's part of what we're mitigating against. We don't just mitigate against fraud. We don't just mitigate against financial risk. We're out here mitigating, and by we, I mean all of us, you all as document reviewers, compliance reviewers, event reviewers, we are mitigating against all these types of risks. And part of the reason that we're talking about them today is I want to make sure we take a minute and talk about how profound the work that you all do really is. Because you're out there removing barriers for clients. You're helping to make sure that donor dollars are used in the way they were intended. You're reducing the risk that perpetrators of fraud are going to receive money from the American Red Cross because of the work that you do. You are also mitigating against compliance risk. Legal risk is pretty straightforward. It means, yeah, we got to follow the law. Like that's kind of pretty common sense. Compliance risk involves our rules and our regulations. And so part of what we do in document review is to make sure that documents that we approve adhere to our guidance. So, is that deed current, or is that bank statement current? Can we see all four corners? Is it legible? Does that ID document have a photo on it? Is the document in the primary client's name? Because we have policies for all of these things, we have to adhere to our own rules. And if we don't, that places us at a compliance risk, particular if we get audited. And it's really not if, it's when. I mean, audits happen and that's okay. It's what, helps us stay accountable and financially healthy. And, I never worry about audits because by golly, we're making sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. But if we don't review cases according to whether or not they're adhering to our program guidelines, then we place the organization at a compliance risk. So, a lot of people get really hung up on this whole, well, it's not fraud, so what's the big deal? And it's bigger than fraud. What we do mitigates against fraud, but also all these other types of risks to the organization. IT and cybersecurity risks, basically everything involving computers or networks. This is IT infrastructure, so computers, networks, servers, anything like that. Any data, software, cloud environments, any credentials. One mitigation we have taken against one of these risks that is relevant to document reviewers is that you all are starting to see unclassified documents come through, because clients will periodically text us something with an attachment. And sometimes that attachment has highly sensitive, personally identifiable information on it. We've had clients do things like text us photos of their social security cards and their driver's licenses and things like that. And that's not something we want to just have sitting in the case feed for anyone who has access to that case to be able to see and potentially have access to that information. So that's why those unclassified documents then get pulled off of those text messages and those emails and get put into your domain as document reviewers so that you can review them as unclassified documents and then classify them based on the type of document they are. Other types of IT risks that we encounter that are less relevant to document review include compromised credentials or using other responders' credentials, both of which we've seen out in the field. But having this process for unclassified documents helps us maintain the confidentiality that is so critical to the Red Cross mission. And a violation of that confidentiality can then, so increased IT and cybersecurity risk can then cause financial, operational, legal, and reputational risk. So examples of this where it's relevant to documents are the downloading of client documents. If you do that, please don't. texting or emailing client documents to yourself or to other members of the workforce. We have encountered some regions in which responders actually take photos of client documents and have been sending them to one another for confirmation. And so we're trying to make sure we really emphasize the importance of confidentiality and how it relates to this type of risk. Since you all are document reviewers, you don't have the document capture feature in RC Care, so please do not take pictures of client documents. Any questions about that? Y'all are pretty quiet today. Okay. So operational risk is pretty similar for document review as it is for anyone else. It's risk involving like all the stuff and the people that happen in the day-to-day doing of what we do. So that's all the people, the processes, the systems, all the external events, because Red Cross doesn't happen in a vacuum. We all have external things that affect us. The organization has external influences. Operational risk also includes like theft of equipment or supplies, like theft of CACs. For document review, if you have are working a case where you suspect that the client might have had their identity stolen, it might actually involve stolen documents. Another example of operational risk happens if workers do things like upload documents from their personal devices. And we have found it's, pardon me, fortunately not super widespread, but we have found a few instances where this has happened. So if you run into that, please help socialize to other members of your workforce that we need not to be uploading client documents, because that means we have client documents on our personal devices, and that's not a good thing. Any questions there? Any challenges that you all have had around these different types of risks, just in the doing of your job? Now, everything that I have said as an example today is an example of inherent risk. So inherent risk is just the risk that is just there if you do nothing. And well, we, as a cadre of review workers, are not in the business of sitting around and doing nothing. We do things. We do things to mitigate risk. And so what we have to contend with really on a day-to-day basis is residual risk. And it's what you get when you subtract the effectiveness of your controls from your inherent risk. So that is the risk that we contend with every day. It's that residual risk. And we're always striving to make that residual risk smaller and smaller. And so, in doing that, we also try to make sure that when we work to make that risk smaller, that we're not doing it in a way that adds undue friction to our clients. So it is in that effort, that's part of the reason why we have this new knowledge base article, to really clarify the dates that are involved in each of the address confirmation types. So hopefully that's helpful and helps both reduce some of the existing risk, but also reduce some friction on clients who may be struggling. Any questions about any of this? So now we're going to change gears a little bit. What have you all seen recently? Have you all had any cases or scenarios that are unusual or that you would like to talk through? I know we've had a few out there that have been a little bit unusual this month. So let's take some time to talk through them. What have you got? For
Well,
the yes, yeah.
These folks are too quiet. We had the one that had a different name, different last name, because apparently she had been married since the event took place. But there was also a difference of 1 digit in her address submitted for address review.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Donna. So we are for our level 4 operations, we are now doing bridge assistance. And that's going to be an ongoing thing. So if you have bridge assistance if you have a level 4, rather, in your region, you will probably see some cases that have bridge assistance come through eventually. You will also likely see some cases with expanded recovery assistance or ERA assistance. And in some of those cases, the documents are actually submitted sometimes months after the event. And in the example that Donna is talking about, the client's address had not been confirmed previously, so was not confirmed during intake. And now this is, what was it, Donna? It was like 5 or 6 months or so after the fact, at least.
Something like that, yes.
And so at this point, since the time of the disaster happened up to now, the client has gotten married and her name changed. And so now none of her current documents are in the same name as her RC Care case, which was opened before she got married. And it took us a little while to figure out what was going on, but this poor client has uploaded, oh my heavens, a lot of documents before we figured out what was happening. And yes, it also appeared that there was a typo in her address, which didn't help. But if you encounter one of those cases like that where it's been months and there is a legitimate reason for like a last name change like that, please let me know. I can help get it worked through. There are ways to get that done.
That's another thing with the expiration dates on the documents. 2 months before the event, not 2 months before now. And I think that some document reviewers are going back 2 months before now with the expirations.
Yeah, and with anyone who works on expanded recovery assistance specifically, they look for ID and address confirmation from the time of the event, but then to get the documents for their roadblocks to get expanded recovery assistance, they look for now. So it's two different sets of expiration dates. Now, expanded recovery assistance does have their own document reviewers. So if you have a document that is submitted as ID and address, and it's just one or the other, and you go to reclassify it, if you see suddenly a bunch more document types in the drop down, so things like displacement or loss of income or housing or things like that, those are all expanded recovery assistance roadblocks. So their caseworkers are doing the document review on those specific documents. They have an entirely separate user role in RC Care. So I'm really glad you brought that one up, because I don't know that I had called out the unusual or different document types. So if anyone sees those, don't worry. Any other questions about that stuff or any other unusual documents you all have had? Trying to think of any unusual ones that we have seen here lately. We did have one in which the responder took photos of the client's driver's license and uploaded them on behalf of the client. And the photo was so bad that we thought it was fraud. Photo was terrible. Like, I thought it was fraud. But no, it was just the responder it was a terrible picture. The client was able to upload the document was fine. I'm not sure why the responder was doing that upload when the client was able to. We're still a little uncertain. Another thing that may be worth calling out with all these bridge programs is if you get word that another agency has declared a client to be guilty of fraud, okay, but we don't take orders from those other agencies. Now, there are times that we work in partnership, like in our non-congregate sheltering. FEMA is working collaboratively with us through non-congregate sheltering. But if an outside agency says, hey, this client is fraud, we don't concur with that until we have done our own investigation. So if you see a case where somebody has said, oh, this client is a fraud face, because like a fire chief or a police officer or somebody like that has said so, it's not okay. Please let me know. And that way we can work together and make sure that client doesn't have any barriers. We've had a few of those of late. Now, in addition, if within your region you ever encounter anyone that's like trying to talk to law enforcement or law enforcement trying to talk to you or anything like that, please provide them with our senior investigator's name, Frank Favilla. You can provide his name and email address. His phone number is also on his email profile. And so that way you do not have to deal with that. That's entirely his job. But as always, the what to do if something is off hasn't changed. Please fill out a suspicious case report, notify your supervisor, and you can always use the concern connection line. In the meantime, if you have ideas for other knowledge-based articles that you think would be helpful for you or your fellow document reviewers, please send them my way. I would be more than happy to have them, because I would very much like to get a good group of resources put together, so that you all can have the tools that you need in the system. And this way, as we see trends and things like that in suspicious documents, we can make those adjustments and act in an iterative way very, very easily. For our next call, I'm going to kind of gather together some of the feedback we've gotten in through some of our client care inboxes, and don't worry, I'm like de-identifying all of it, but as it pertains to document reviews, so we can kind of see what's up, what questions are being asked about documents, and talk through some of those. We will, again, ask if anyone has seen recent suspicious documents, and we're going to talk about form documents. So I know that, for example, some states have form leases, but we're going to talk about other form documents that may exist and it varies a lot from place to place. And if you have other issues that you would like to discuss, absolutely let me know. Would be happy to incorporate them in what we do. Any questions at all? And next month we'll be back to actually looking at documents too. If there are no questions, we'll just wrap up early today. And I will stick around for a little bit while in case anyone has any questions afterwards. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And I will see you all on August 23rd. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, Chris. See ya.
See ya.